As sales professionals, we're going to receive objections. It's just hands down. We get them. The problem is, are we as prepared to handle the objections that we're receiving from our prospects? On today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can handle and take care of those common objections that you receive, even if you're an introvert. This is a fun episode. You're going to love it. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast here on TSC TV on YouTube. I'm your host, Donald Kelly, the Sales Evangelist, and I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today as I'm knocking over my chapstick and different belongings on my desk. But we're going to still roll with it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, today we have an awesome guest. His name is Matthew Pollard. And Matthew was on my podcast. I think this is his third or fourth time on the show. And I love talking to this guy. He just brings so much energy, so much excitement, so much knowledge, so much practical things that you could take and apply. And this episode, though it's tied around objection, he's going to weave into some different things, especially if you're an introvert, and how you can be effective in your sales career. So sit back, buckle up, and if you haven't done so already yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button for a brother. I would appreciate it. Also, tell your friends, cousin, aunts, and your mom about the podcast, and hopefully they can subscribe as well as like our YouTube channel and subscribe. But anyways, if they don't do that yet, just keep reminding them. We're going to have a great episode. Let's go ahead and dive in with Matthew. Matthew, welcome to the show, man.
Man, I'm ecstatic to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, man. And this is your third stint on our podcast now, I believe. And I remember the very first time. You probably don't remember it because it was so long ago. I was doing it as a software sales rep. I had taken my lunch break. I was in Boca Raton, and I was in a church parking lot on their Wi-Fi.
You know, I actually do remember parts of that. And I remember I said, thanks for having me on, because I was building my brand at the same time. And you're like, yep, mate, grinding it out. Here we go.
So look at that, almost like 6 years later now from when I first launched the show. Yeah, great, amazing things happen. And since then, you've had a couple books and so forth. I bragged about that a little bit in the teaser. But why don't you take a second and tell us about your newest book that you have there behind you?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, it all stemmed from the book that I think you interviewed me on, my second interview with you guys. Yep. But, my first book is The Introvert's Edge, and it focuses on selling as an introvert, which is kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people, to thinking introverts can sell. But secondly, I actually go as far as saying introverts can outsell their extroverted counterparts. And the new book on networking really focuses on how I believe that introverts actually can out-network their extroverted counterparts. You might realize there's actually not a lot of fields left for those extroverts to dominate. And that's because I just believe that introverts have an advantage in every so-called extroverted arena. The problem is that we just believe in our heads that we have a disadvantage, and we don't. The truth is our path to success is just different to that of an extrovert. And as soon as we embrace that, we become superpowers at it. And, really what my work is all about is bringing systems and process that allow us to channel our natural strengths of empathy, active listening into the networking field, into the sales field. And that's, really what the next book's about. It's really about how introverts, through planning and preparation and a great system, can leverage their strengths to not just succeed, not just do okay, but absolutely dominate in face-to-face networking, but also in virtual networking, and then later online in all frames. Because in truth, if you can't articulate the value of what you do when somebody's politely listening to you for 3 minutes, you have no hope online. So we go full loop to help people understand how to do that online as well when they get to that time.
Oh, dude, you're so right on that. And I think a lot of times people practice on their prospects rather than doing the proper preparation before they get into those situations.
It drives me crazy to see that. I see people all the time and they're like, oh, I'm going to networking rooms to get prospects. So they walk around, will you buy from me? No, what about you? What about you? It is horrible. We see that on LinkedIn with those spam messages that we get. But that's not what networking is about. I go as far to talk about prospects is actually not the reason we go networking, because that just leaves you stuck in this hamster wheel of finding interested prospects, trying to set yourself out and make the sale. And really, networking is really about fostering long-term relationships with what I call champions and momentum partners, people that sing your praises and have high-level credibility to add to your work, and momentum partners, people like you that share your work with audiences beyond the networks you currently have.
Oh, so true, man. Well, let's talk about this. The likely objections that we're going to be facing, and I think you have some interesting thoughts on this. How can we prepare for that, especially as sales reps? Where we're going into situations all the time where and then especially under these circumstances, this is being we're recording this during the middle of the pandemic, but people have their objections, their top objections, and I want to be able to improve. And you mentioned something that I really feel that ties back to this, like introverts have that system or they follow the processes. So speak to that to me. Help us out. Some sales reps are listening to this and they're trying to figure out how can I prepare for those likely objections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting when we talk about the word objection, introverts, there's nothing we want to hear worse than an objection, right? Because we feel it personally. So for us, I mean, the important thing and the reason why I talk about systems is when you have a system, it's an external process. So because of that, when something goes right, you can celebrate it, sure, but it's really about showing that the system works. And when something goes wrong, it's not a personal attack on you. It's a part of the system that broke and you need to fix it. It's like, the person most well known for the mass production vehicle, Henry Ford. When the car came off the production line, perhaps not as good as it should be, he didn't go, oh my gosh, I was never supposed to manufacture vehicles. He just went, issue with the system, we need to fix that. So the first thing for introverts is realizing that by externalizing it and having a structured system in networking, in sales, in leadership, by doing that, it becomes less personal when things don't go right. But secondly, for introverts specifically, we get so stuck in our head trying to think of what to say. And because of that, often we don't articulate the best version of ourselves or the best thing at the right time. So because of that, we need to have a planned structure for what we say. Now, of course, I'd love to cover every version of a planned process from networking to sales, but we're not going to have time to do that today. So focusing just on receiving objections is a great place to start because story is by far the most powerful thing. Now, when you get an objection, an extrovert, the first thing that they're more likely to do is literally shove something down the throat of the person, like attack them on the phone and go into all these logical reasons for why the customer should work with them. And what happens is the C-level executives just hang up the phone. But even the middle managers, they agree to an appointment. They're not the right decision maker. So it's bad for the brand. But they just go straight into attack mode, likely because they probably had too much coffee leading into it to get hyped up to do that grind. An introvert, on the other hand, we get stuck in our head. So because of that, we don't know what to say. So before we get into story, let me just share what I call an objection handling cushion, which is what I suggest everybody says, because it gives you time to emotionally regulate for those extroverts and for those introverts to work out what story to say. Now, I suggest you say something like, I perfectly understand. The last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, now the words are critical. I perfectly understand. I listened, I heard you. I understand you're busy, i.e., the last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. Now, the word however is not the word but, by the way. Salespeople love using the word but. Now, the word but is what's called a subtraction term. It says, everything I said before this, I didn't mean, now let me tell you what I really think. The word however is an additional. It says, I meant everything I said before. However, have you considered this additional piece of information? Now, for the people listening at home that don't believe me, go home, for those husbands married, go home to your wife and say, dear, you look beautiful in that dress, but, and see what happens. It's not going to be good for anyone. Now, once you get that objection handling cushion out of the way, you then get to select a story that you tell. Now, this is critical because, if you're trying to think of all the stories you can tell on the fly, there's too many options. And more often than not, you'll tell the story, well, we worked with someone that had that objection and we got them to this outcome. You say it in this one-dimensional way. I talk about, most people, if you're a small business, you should be selling to a niche, and therefore you should know the three major problems that they have and have one story for each, or the three major objections and having a story for each. For corporations, think of it as sales plays, or what department you're from and what the primary objective that you're pitching right now is. What are the three major objections and what are the three major stories? It's interesting. I worked with a team, Colliers International, and they said, oh, we get so many objections. I'm like, all right, let's put them up on the whiteboard. We got to 3 and they were like, oh, and eventually they gave me one that didn't sound like all the others. That was kind of a fourth. So everyone thinks they have so many, but in truth, they really don't. They've got ones that they use different words, but they're all kind of the same objections. So then what happens is when you say, you get the objection, you say, I perfectly understand. The last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, and then you tell them a story that you've planned and prepared, but more like the story of how you met your husband or wife. You know, the story that over time evolves from that, kind of bulky thing that, you said some things and they didn't really, other people didn't like. So you got rid of that stuff. And then other times you said something about it and, you went, oh, they liked that. So we'll embellish a little bit more, that theatrical masterpiece that you tell now. My wife and I do it. I say certain things, she says certain things, we hold each other's hands, we look at each other like, so that's how we met. So what I mean is stories like that. Now, when you do that, stories do three things. First thing, it short circuits the logical mind, which is the part of the brain that says, that'll work, that won't work, I don't have time for this, hang up. The part of the brain that will give you 8 seconds on the phone. What happens is you short circuit the logical mind, you speak directly to the emotional mind. The emotional mind is the part of the brain that goes, oh, story time, and it listens. It assumes all the detail as fact, and it just listens for the moral, i.e., we had a customer just like you who had an objection and we got them an amazing outcome, but a robust story with all the emotional journeys of a person that almost lost their job or got a promotion in the end. Now, when you do that, first thing, people remember 22 times more information when embedded into stories. For introverts, it activates the reticular activating system of our brain, which means we create artificial rapport. And all of a sudden, we've got this customer on the hook. That's how you handle an objection, because when you use story, the science behind it creates this potent cocktail that makes you irresistible, even if they've got a really good objection.
Oh man, I'm a partner. One of our sales partner, our courses that we just developed with the Pacific Institute is around selling mindset. And go back to what you're saying with the neuroscience portion, but the RAS, the reticular activating system, we just went over that with a team today with a major insurance company. But yeah, reticular activating system, it's amazing that it happens. But everything you're saying there, it just makes so much sense. But I guess my question is why people don't do it though.
Well, firstly, it doesn't come natural. So what happens is we see all these extroverts that we see them network, we see them sell, we see them handle objections, and they're just willing to go to war. Actually, let's use the Collier's example because it's a really interesting one. So when they first reached out to me, they were 3 principals that had worked in this organization for nearly they'd had about a decades of experience each. They hired this whole group of people that they decided to train their way. And they wanted new people, right? So they hired all these people and he said, we really have 2 groups of people. We've got the group of, introverts that literally best characterized by Thomas, who literally scared of his own shadow and in the last 6 months has made 1 appointment that was borderline useless in his words. He said, but that's our best type of rep because the other group is the group of extroverts and they are killing our brand by just browbeating people into appointments. So I came in and I introduced them to the objection handling cushion. I perfectly understand. Last thing I want to do is waste any time. However, and then I suggested that they use a story. Well, what happened is obviously Alex Durham, the big bulldog guy that came from 2 extroverted parents, is like, they're going to listen to me for 8 seconds at the most. So I took them through the science of story and why it works. And then I got them to trust me. And what was interesting is the introverted guy, actually, I mean, let's face it, he kind of sucked at selling without this. So he gravitated to it. And he just, every day, he just got better and better. The extroverts actually gravitated to it faster and got better results, but they loved winging things. And that's what we think. Extroverts are the best salespeople. So it's better to wing it. So because of that, we don't tell planned stories because for extroverts, it's like, oh, I've got to take a step back to take a step forward. So while the extroverts gravitated to it quickly, the introverts took a little bit longer. Well, 6 months later, literally Thomas, the introverted guy, won they call it the top dog award because he was the first junior partner that ever outsell all the principals of the company. And now all of a sudden, all the extroverts are like, story, what? Let's spend some more time understanding this. But what happened was, what generally happens is that extroverts generally lead the way and we all follow. And introverts believe that there's this wall that we can't cross. And a lot of times extroverts just say whatever comes to mind. And a lot of times they don't have deep relationships with their clients like introverts do. So they actually don't know the details of the story. I did a big presentation for, it was $1 billion tech company. And when I did this work with them, I do this thing where I tell this story based keynote. It's called Build Your Story Playbook. And a lot of times I'll prepare for the presentation by interviewing a bunch of people. And sometimes I'll even tell one of their stories from stage. And I remember asking questions, and I call it asking questions. It was an interrogation for 45 minutes. I literally asked these 7 different people questions about their customer. And then at the end, I summarized their story back to them in 45 seconds. It is really, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so much more compelling than what we did. He said, how did you do this? And, this is all the story framework that I talk about, creating a 3-dimensional story. But for me, I said, well, the things that I don't understand about what you just told me. Firstly, you keep talking about this CTO that decided to move to the cloud. What was the CTO's name? And they went, oh, it's David. I said, here's the problem. When you say CTO, I can't feel any emotions of CTO. But when it comes to David, I can feel everything that he's going through. But I can't really understand what he's going through. You said you've been chasing him for years to move into the cloud. Why all of a sudden did he decide to do that? And they went, oh, we don't know. So they went away and they found out. And again, the reason why people don't do it is because they don't ever speak to their clients later and find out or ask better questions. So as they sent them away to go and find out, and what they said is, oh, we just found out what happened is it was a government organization. They had this, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. So what happened is it broke, and it broke just before Christmas, and they couldn't run payroll. Thousands of government staff, no payroll. And literally, David had to get his entire team to work through Christmas to make sure everyone got paid by New Year's. So David was the guy that ruined Christmas. How was this not part of the story? I've worked with gym franchises where they're like, oh, they were going to cancel. I got them to stay. Why did they want to lose work in the first place? Why did they want to lose weight in the first place? Turns out they're trying to get pregnant. How is that not part of the story? Did they get pregnant? How are the grandparents about that? Craziness. Yeah. So what happens is, I would say that most people don't know the elements of the story. So when you say, do you tell a story? Everyone goes, yeah, I tell stories. No, you don't. You tell stories. Customer wanted this, so we gave it to them. Not like the story of how you met your partner. And what happens is then we think we're telling stories and we're not getting results. So then we go back to hard-hitting information that, again, because neither of them work well. But what happens is if you go back to telling stories and you do it in a way where the stories are well presented, they're well planned, they're well practiced. Firstly, introverts don't believe they can, so they don't gravitate to it. And extroverts, it's a little bit harder at the start, but so much better in the long term. Well, then something like what happens to Collier's happens. I mean, they went from $2 million worth of revenue a year to literally within the space of 2 months, they put $1 million in their pipeline. Less than a year later, they were a $10 million company, and the introverts were outselling the extroverts. Now, again, this is not new stuff. It drives me nuts to say this, but Brian Tracy, one of the most extroverted people on the planet, says the top 10% of all sales performers have a planned presentation. The bottom 80% just say whatever comes out of their mouth, which is why extroverts do better in that 80%. But a planned presentation. By the way, if you don't think introverts can sell, if you don't think they can network, Zig Ziglar was an introvert. So I think it might be possible for you. But what I will tell you is most people don't use story because it takes a little bit of extra work. And most people think sales is about having the gift of gab. And there is nothing more of a fallacy than that.
Oh, thank you for saying that and for reiterating that. I think it's just so key. I feel that I think it was Daniel Pink who talked about it, the sell is human, and they talked about the idea of the ambiverts, those people who a little bit more introvert than most. And I mean, just going back to even like your text and all the stuff that you're sharing, like we don't have to believe the fallacy that the movies share. Movies sell drama, and we can't take that as doctrine, but those are the extroverts in those movies, but the introverts are the ones that truly win. So I love it, man.
Well, I can tell you introverts project this, right? They project extroversion on people because we say, oh, a lot of the extroverts in movies. Well, let's think about some of the best actors, Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio. What about Bill Murray? I mean, he has to be an extrovert, right? No, all introverted. Well, what about people like Oprah Winfrey? Clearly, if she can just have she's an introvert too. So we're running out of people that we can say, oh, they're successful because They're extroverted. The truth is that introversion and extroversion, they're just different paths to success, right? I mean, I do, when we were talking about this presentation I did for this company, I got up and I talked through this whole presentation about the power of story. And at the end, I'll tell, so what does a great story look like? And I'll get up and I will tell a story like I work for the organization. At the end of telling their story, complete with industry acronyms when absolutely unavoidable, because you shouldn't fill a sales pitch with that, I then will say, who here thinks I work for the company? And like 97% of the room put their hands up. And I'm like, listen, I interviewed for this story 6 weeks ago. I wrote it out a week ago. I remembered it yesterday. If I can deliver it looking like I'm a natural, that I've worked for this organization for 10 years, what excuse do you have? What happens is people get overwhelmed with complex data and they end up hiding behind emails, or they don't prepare for networking, especially introverts, because we don't even want to think about we have to go until we're in the room. And then of course we fail. The truth is, this just takes preparation, but the people that plan and prepare succeed, whether they're introverted or extroverted. Extroverts have got to learn to listen. Gosh, they have to learn to listen. They have to learn to empathize. We have to learn to systemize out our weaknesses. We both have burdens to bear, but introversion is just this, where you draw your energy from. That is it, right? For me, I can go out and network. I can go out and sell. I even enjoy myself. The truth is, I'm enjoying this podcast. It just means at the end, like a kid that went and had a great time on all the rides at Disneyland, I'm tired, where extroverts feel like they can go out and they want to go and do something else, right? Something else more extroverted. That's the only difference. And for me, I believe that psychologists have made it way too complicated. I believe that people have a higher tendency to extroversion or a higher tendency to introversion. That's where they draw their energy. But they learn to enjoy everything in between if they've learned systems to do so. So I know extroverts that are amazing writers and they love their writing time, even though I know other extroverts that are climbing the walls because they don't have a process for controlling their mindset. And I know introverts that love sellers, that love networking, that love speaking from stage, and other people that are terrified of it. It's your choice. You have to choose not to let what the world tells you define you, but then secondly, understand a system. And if you just start by using the objection cushion that I suggested to handle objections and then leading into a well-prepared story that you've written out with emotional content, all of a sudden you'll see that transformation and use the time saving that gives you that ROI, whether it's higher commission or just less time on the phone because you're closing more deals with less numbers, right? Sales is not a numbers game, it's a systems game. Then invest that little bit of extra time that you save or some of that money that you make into giving yourself more time to spend learning the next system that will change your life.
Oh, Matthew, I wish we can go on for a little bit longer, but this is this is just gold. If there's one major takeaway you want folks listening to this episode to walk away with, what's that one major piece of advice?
The main piece of advice that I would give people is, again, it doesn't matter if you're introverted or extroverted, is there is a system to learn everything. In one of my presentations, I talk about Nate Boyer and how he learned to snap a football from watching YouTube videos. If you can do that, you can learn how to sell, you can learn how to network from systems. If you're an extrovert, learn how to actively listen. In truth, it's just a skill set, and there's books on that as well. But if you are an introvert, I would really recommend, you don't need to buy my books. I know a lot of authors are supposed to be in here, buy my book. My publisher hates me when I say this. You don't need to do that.
You guys should. I'm recommending it. So,
well, those people that are listening, they can start by just downloading the first chapter for free. In there, if it's The Introvert's Edge, my first book, you can learn literally how to overcome your adversities or belief that you can sell. And I map out the full 7-step process that you literally just have to put what I suggest in the right order, fill in the gaps, and then throw out the stuff that doesn't fit because you shouldn't be saying it to clients. And that will double your sales in the next 60 days. And, The Introvert's Edge to Networking will do the same. And you can download the first chapter at theintrovertsedge.com/networking.
Awesome. Matthew, we appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today, man. Thank you. Thank you so much, brother.
It was my pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on.
That was Matthew Pollard, and if you want to connect with Matthew and check out his books, please go down below and check on the links. Click on it, schedule an opportunity, or you don't need to schedule anything. Just go ahead and click on the link and get an opportunity to connect with Matthew and also purchase his book and take advantage of listening to some of the content that he produces. You can also find his Facebook group and all the details that he's sharing. So much wisdom. I recommend you do so. Find all the details again in our show notes, or if you're watching this on TSC TV on YouTube, just scroll down and click on a link. As always, we share stuff like this because we want to help you. We tell you about our sponsors because they're friends of ours that are providing value that can help you in your sales career. We want you to find more of those ideal customers. We want you to break out of your comfort zone and to go connect with those people and to bring tremendous value to them. We want you to be able to close more deals, but most importantly, we want you to go out each and every single day and change your mindset and do big things. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video today. If you enjoyed the content, I ask you to go ahead and hit that like button, that thumbs up at the bottom right-hand corner. Also, to make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. This way, we'll keep you up to date with all the latest sales strategies, latest tools, and things that are going to help you to not only find more prospects, but to close more deals. Thanks so much.